All right, guys, I am super excited to have with us today a man who has voiced some of the characters that I have loved both on the screen, feature film, and short TV series, cartoons, and also video games. The legendary voice actor, Mr. Neil Ross. How are you doing today?
Here I am, man of a thousand voices. I always get that wrong. Hi, Jimmy. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And I feel like at this point in time, Neil, any introduction as far as trying to list my favorite characters of you it would just be, it's overwhelming to even think about. You've done so many, as you just said, they're the man of a thousand vices or voices. But the journey for you, I know you were into radio before you really got into acting. When you started off doing voiceover work for radio programming, was the end goal eventually for you to do acting, cartoons or film or anything, or did you think at the time you were set just doing radio stuff?
As best as I can recall, because it's a long time ago, I really started out in radio with the idea of being in radio, being a disc jockey, being like my idol of the time, a guy named Bill Balance, a top-rated radio DJ in Los Angeles. That was my goal. And as I mentioned in my book, which we'll get to, I started out fiddling around with trying to do voices and characters and accents. Back when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I would try to imitate things that I heard on the radio, people that I heard on the radio. Mm. But it was strictly a thing that I did for fun, with no thought of turning it into any kind of a way to make a buck. And at a certain point, midway through high school, having no clue in the world what I was going to do with my life, I suddenly got this insane idea of being a radio disc jockey. And the more I thought about it, the better it sounded. So, yeah, I started out initially sincerely thinking that would be my entire life's journey. And then little by little over time, I began to realized that really whatever talents I possessed, they were best used in the production studio. Most radio stations in those days, and probably still now, there's not one studio in the station, there's two. There's the air studio where the stuff happens that you hear from minute to minute on the air. Right. But then there's another studio called the production studio or the production room. And that's where all the pre-recorded commercials and promotional announcements get recorded. And I began to realize I had a little bit of a flair in the production room. And in some ways, I enjoyed it more than the live stuff, because with live, it's just live. You're on a tightrope the whole time. You either get it right or you screw it up and you just move on. But in the production studio, I could sit down and really pick and choose music and sound effects, and then I could do many, many, many takes trying to perfect something. And I found that satisfying. Most of my coworkers detested production work. They never wanted to set foot in that room. It was drudgery to them. But to me, it was a kind of a place to be creative and have some fun. And as I got more and more into this, I began to wonder about these voices that I heard coming out of the television set on the national television commercials, and the voices that I heard in the national radio commercials that would come into the station on tape, and I would have to put them on a tape cartridge. That's inside baseball stuff. But anyway, I would wonder, and I would recognize some of the voices over and over again. And I wondered who these people were. I wondered who voiced cartoon shows. I wondered who did narrations on documentaries. And I had sort of a working theory that they were on-camera actors who did this stuff on the side, which was probably true in some instances. But suddenly, one wonderful afternoon in 1970, I was having a conversation with a record promoter from Los Angeles, and he just blurted out the word or words or contraction, voiceovers. And I said, what I'd never heard this. And I scarcely daring to dream, I said, what are voiceovers? And he said, oh, you know, commercials, cartoons, promos, voiceovers. And I
Yeah.
said, you mean that's a business? And he didn't know a lot about it, but he said, yeah, it's a separate business unto itself. They have agents, and some of them make a fortune, and all they do is voice stuff. And I suddenly thought, gosh, you know, because I was beginning to become a little disenchanted with the radio deal. I thought, if there was ever a business where I could use close to 100% of what I have to offer, it has to be this voiceover thing. I must get into this. And it took me another 10 years to get rolling, but that was kind of the evolution of the thing. Long-winded answer to your question.
No, and it's really cool to hear you describe what really started to get you to thinking about that. It's funny that you mentioned hearing those same voices and then starting to try to find out more about them. Their friend's dad of mine was in a film that I did in film school, and he, by his day job, is to do radio voiceover. So it was funny having grown up with him, and then to a certain point where, you know, you're driving yourself to high school or whatever, and in the morning you hear his voice, you know, talking about a car dealership or what have you. It's something that I think you start to grow an appreciation to, at least for me, as far as voice actors and actresses and voiceover work, more when I was like in high school, starting to realize that, you know, especially like in your case, where these actors are doing voices of, you know, multiple different characters that you may have had a fandom of, and then you realize that, you know, 2 or 3 of the characters that you grew up loving are all voiced by the same actor, which is always a pretty cool thing. I know for me and you, I think the earliest exposure, you know, in looking back, when I first found the name Neil Ross, was on the G.I. Joes. That you know, that whole series was so iconic for me as a kid, going to school and talking about G.I. Joes, but then, you know, going back again and, you know, getting into like the comic books at an older age, and then being like, man, they're like taking the comic books and the strips and then turning it into the, you know, the series, and then it, you know, it's a whole circle of life thing, as a lot of cartoons are, where, you know, a new version of the book becomes a new cartoon, and then it goes into another version. But what was that like for you, finding that role and being part of a G.I. Joe's? Because that name, you know, when that show was, you know, new and I was watching it as a kid, that it's a name that carried a lot of weight to a lot of kids.
Well, it all happened very quickly. There was a huge sea change in children's television in the early 80s, which had to do with the Reagan administration. And he was a big believer, Ronald Reagan, in deregulation. And he appointed a chap to run the FCC who was also a big believer in deregulation. So they deregulated children's television to the point where it became financially rewarding to create shows that would run in the afternoons after school.
Right.
You know, up to that point, it was all Saturday morning, basically, the 3 networks, and they had Saturday morning, and that was it for cartoons, boys and girls. If you're not around on Saturday morning, you're out of luck. But suddenly they were creating 65-episode shows that would run Monday through Friday in the afternoons. And suddenly there was a lot of work around. And I went from being basically a bit player who would just be called in to play an incidental role or two in a show. And eventually I did become a regular cast member on some Saturday morning stuff. But suddenly I got the lead role in Voltron, Defender of the Universe. And that one, they were actually going to do 125 episodes, and did.
Jeez.
And around that same time, that's when G.I. Joe came into my life. I had worked for Wally Burr, who was the voice director on G.I. Joe and Transformers and Inhumanoids and various other shows. I had worked for him on and off on an early version of Spider-Man. And so he called me in, and the first G.I. Joe character that I got was the chainsaw wielding, I should say, Dreadnought Buzzer. I started doing Buzzer, and then not too much after that, I was called in to read for this part of a sailor character.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be one of the most beloved characters that I've voiced in my career, and that's the character of Shipwreck.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful one to bag. And we were just very, very busy jumping. I mean, more or less, I did Voltron, G.I. Joe, and Transformers all in the same time frame. So you along with some other shows too. It was really an amazing period. There was so much work going on. It was astonishing. At one point, I carried a little portable cassette player around with me, and I had a cassette which had all the characters, the regular characters that I performed in all these different shows. And I would sit in the parking lot and cue up the voice I was going to do when I got in the studio and listen to it over and over again just to make sure I still had it, because I was doing so many at that point that I needed to refresh my memory.
Yeah, I got to imagine it, doing that simultaneously. Are you doing days of where it was maybe like Transformers in the morning and then G.I. Joe in the afternoon? Are you doing it that much, or are you doing like G.I. Joe's one day, Transformers another day?
In those days, they could work you for 8 hours. So if you committed to doing an episode of, say, G.I. Joe on a Wednesday, your Wednesday was pretty much booked up. And because Wally was doing both G.I. Joe and Transformers, he would never book both of them on the same day.
Yeah.
And I tell people when I talk about the voiceover agents, I say if things go extremely well, your agent is no longer trying to get you work. Your agent is just trying to arrange your schedule so you can do everything and not miss out on anything. So a lot of it involved negotiations with agents. Sometimes, well, we want him on Wednesday. Well, he's already booked to do Voltron, but he could get over there by 2. Would that work for you? Well, I guess, all right, we'll pick up his lines, whatever we have to do, this kind of thing. A few years, around 1987, we ended up getting the 4-hour session. And then it was feasible to work 2 shows a day, and many of us did.
That environment, really, for me, being growing up in the 80s, the golden age of these, like you're saying, everyday after school cartoons that are still so much the golden age of then that they're still so loved now. They haven't gone, really anywhere. If you go to a convention or, have a discussion in some kind of an open forum, like the names Transformers, G.I. Joe, Voltron, those are all, so much beloved to the, the cartoon version of like a Star Wars or Star Trek fandom. And back then, I got to imagine it was a whole lot more recording in, a studio or a booth opposed to now. I know a lot of voiceover artists have like a setup at home or, work, auditions and stuff from home. Were you, in the studio when you're recording your lines? Is the whole, a big chunk of the cast there as well, and you guys are feeding off of each other, or was it a like one at a time type of a thing?
No, the whole cast would be in there. Back then, they wanted the whole cast to be present, and you were under considerable pressure to show up. Um, and now I gathered that has changed over the years. Some of it, I suppose, out of necessity. They started using a lot of celebrities,
Mm-hmm.
and these people are not as available as we were.
Yeah.
And I think they began to get used to sort of working around the schedules of the actors. And nowadays, when I work, I'm sometimes alone, and but frankly, I much prefer working with the other actors. I mean, that's the chemistry. That's what makes it great. If somebody's feeding me a line that I have to react to, a lot of my reaction is based on what they feed me.
Yeah.
And if their line hits me in a way that I hadn't anticipated, suddenly I have to react, and I end up doing my line in a way that I never thought I was going to. And sometimes that kind of chemistry makes it so much better. I mean, that's the fun of acting. It's almost like a good tennis volley, which is so good that you don't give a damn who wins the point. It's just such a great volley. And so I can do whatever I have to do, but I'm not necessarily that thrilled with working alone. But now, especially with the pandemic,
Yeah.
putting actors together in the studio could conceivably be life-threatening. So,
Right. That's one thing to the advantage of doing anything animated with voice actors is I'm sure it slows everything down. This pandemic has as far as entertainment and production goes, but that's one thing. A cartoon, especially now with the technology to be able for the actors to do it at their own home, I'd imagine is to the benefit of like if they were going to do GI Joe today during the pandemic, as far as being able to record all the lines and everything versus a live action where it's near to impossible to try to assemble a sizable live action film crew. Moving to more of the video game side, one character that I saw you in looking at in all your credits that I saw you voice again and again is one of my favorites from the Star Wars universe. You have done a considerable amount in the video game world of Star Wars of Han Solo, which is pretty cool.
yeah. It just my memory is I was just hired to do that. I don't think I even auditioned. Excuse me. And people have asked about this before, and at no time did anybody say, imitate Harrison Ford. They just brought me in and I did the lines, and maybe they thought I sounded a little bit like him. I don't know. But, I don't know why they picked me. And one of the things you learn going in is the last thing you want to say to a buyer is, "Why'd you pick me?" You want to breeze in acting as though, "Of course you picked me. Doesn't everyone?"
Yeah.
And so I would never ask anybody unless I knew them really well. I would never ask anybody, "How did I get this?" It sounds like you don't think you should be there, and that's not a good thing to project.
Do you, the video game concept, have you ever gone back and played one of the games that you're a voice on?
Yes and no. It's funny. I'm really kind of a Luddite. I've had to learn a lot of, computer stuff, but it's been a slow, painful education for me, I'll tell you. And I don't know. Early on in the thing, they used to send us copies of the games. They stopped doing that. At least they did in my case. But I got this game. I don't even remember what it was, but I thought I'm going to see how this works and listen to my voice and see how I did, And I'm picturing like I got a DVD of GI Joe and I just throw it in there and watch it. But I loaded this game and I started trying to figure out how the hell to even get started. Suddenly the computer froze up and I couldn't make anything work. And I finally called my tech and he came over and he actually had to take the computer to his shop and do things to it. And He said, these games, they're kind of rough on computers. What you should do is get a separate computer and just play games on that and don't use this one.
Yeah,
I said, I got a better idea. How about I don't play these games at all? He says, well, that would work. So the only game I played, my daughter, she got hung up on The Curse of Monkey Island, in which I played a couple of parts in that. And I used to go in and try to help her. She would get terribly frustrated when she couldn't make things work. And I would try to help. And of course, I was no help at all. But that's the closest I came to ever playing one of these things.
The video game franchise, that to me, playing yourself, yeah, have you ever got over the lump of the technical stuff? But to play a character that you are the voice of, that would be pretty. That would be a pretty meta moment. That'd be pretty surreal to me, I think. But you getting to do another feature that was, really an iconic film. I think a film that now has almost reached a cult classic. Favorite kind of fandom, especially in the animation style that it exists in, and that was Fievel, man. That film is kind of like one of those movies, like an All Dogs Go to Heaven. Like if you saw it when it existed, you grew up loving it, and there are people that I know that never watched it, and now they go back and they watch it and they really like it. But what was that one like for you?
Yeah, you're referring to An American Tail.
Right, yeah.
And, that movie, and again, I may be wrong about some of the details, but I don't think that movie gets enough credit. Because at the time that it came out, the feature animation business was almost dead.
Yeah.
Nobody was doing anything. Hanna-Barbera might do a movie based on one of their TV series, but it wouldn't be in full release. It would just show on Saturday mornings at certain theaters. And there just wasn't any feature animation production. And then along came An American Tail, and this will sound like chump change, but remember, we're talking like, I forget, 84, 85, whenever it was.
Right.
It grossed over 50 million worldwide, which was a huge number for, a live action movie would have been thrilled to gross 50 million in those days. And it suddenly woke everybody up. There's an audience for this stuff. And suddenly Disney's back in the game, and eventually Pixar comes along. And I mean, there's a whole renaissance of feature animation. But in my memory, it was all triggered by the success of An American Tail. And how did I get involved in that? My agent called and said, they're interested in you. Well, I don't know that they were interested in me now that I think back. They're going to do a feature film, and there's a character in there I think you could do. So what you need to do is record a sample of this character. It's an Irish mouse. He's he's a sort of a corrupt Tammany Hall politician type in New York. And I said, all right, send me the sides, as they call movie script pages. She said, well, there are none. They're not sending anything out. You just make something up and send it in. And I said, oh, really? They don't feel like sending me any sides, eh? Well, perhaps I won't feel like sending them an audition. We'll see how that works. And that might have been the end of it. But after a couple of days, I thought, oh, get over yourself. And I had a little studio in my house, tape recorders and things like that. So I sort of ad-libbed, about a minute and a half of a sort of a speech made by a drunken Irish politician in New York, you see. And I threw the tape in a manila envelope and went down to the post office and mailed it off to Steven Spielberg. This all sounds so quaint in this day and age when MP3s are whipping around the planet.
Yeah, really.
I went to the post office and I mailed it to him. And to my amazement, a couple of weeks later, I was told I had the part. And I went in and did my lines. Sadly, I did not work with Madeline Kahn. I was a huge fan of hers, and I would have been thrilled. But no, that was not to be. Everybody worked separately, as I understand it. The director, Don Bluth, read her lines, and I reacted to his line readings. And that's how it went, and it was a thrill to be have a pretty solid part in a major animation movie.
Like you said, that was really along that time. If it wasn't directly the resurgence, it was definitely an instrumental part of the resurgence of animation, especially at the feature film level. When you are at that phase of that film comes out, I always notice when we're talking about a certain genre that there's these definite like waves of popularity. Like with scary movies, like there'll be a time period where everyone's into like ghost stories, and then everyone's into the next thing, and then the next thing. With that movie, did you see the wave coming as you did your lines, or as you maybe have gotten news about it before it was even released? Were you thinking that this movie was going to be the one that kind of sparked that turnaround into the next phase of fandom in feature animation?
No, didn't have a clue.
No,
just hoped for the best. And you talk about the longevity of G.I. Joe and Transformers. Again, people ask about that. Did you have any idea that 35 years later? No. In those days, the common wisdom was that you had your audience for maybe 2-3 years if you were lucky. And then they would outgrow the show and be a new crop of kids, and they would want something different. And so you were lucky to get 2-3 years out of anything. A show like the Smurfs, which went, I believe, 7 seasons. That was like, wow, 7 seasons. The idea of a show like The Simpsons lasting, I don't know how long. What is it, 30 plus years?
Yeah, like 33, 32, something like that.
I mean, people would have said, you must be on some sort of substance. That's not going to happen. Are you insane? And so no, we had no clue. We thought it would just run its course and get stuck on a shelf somewhere, and we would go on with our lives. And the idea that 30 some odd years later we would be flown to conventions and have hundreds of people standing in line to get autographs and talk to us would have been utterly unthinkable. But that's exactly what happened.
You have lent your voice to films that are, cult classics, but they're not animated. One in particular, Back to the Future 2, which is my favorite of that trilogy. I always thought it was so cool when they went to the future. But getting to do voice work on that film, had you seen number 1? Going in and getting to do voice work for Back to the Future 2?
Interesting question. I can't remember. Obviously, I've seen one, but I don't remember exactly when I did. I must have. It's just, lost in the mists of time. But that was a lovely little job that fell out of the sky. I have no idea how I got that one. And yet again, I didn't ask. I've explained why. People ask me to tell the story, and there really isn't much of a story. It happened at Universal, and it was in the basement of the Alfred Hitchcock Theater. They in those days, I assume it's still there. On the Universal lot, there's a full-size movie theater where I guess they show, new movies to the executives and what have you. But then in the basement, they had a complete sound setup to record sound for movies, and that's where we did it, in the basement of the Alfred Hitchcock Theater. And I breezed in, and there were two guys looking at me through the glass, and they said hi, and I said hi, and they said, "You want to give it a whirl?" I said, "Of course." And we did, I think I did 3 takes, and they said, "Okay, great, we're done." And I said, "You sure? I mean, is there anything else you want me to try?" "No, no, 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 no. We're good. We're good. Thank you." Well, thank you. And that's the whole story. I wish there was some really neat twist to it, but it was just another day at the office, really. But then you find out you're suddenly a part of the trilogy, as people have said to me when they meet me at conventions. You're part of the trilogy, and I'm very grateful for that. But at the time, I didn't realize what a big deal it was going to be.
Yeah, and you really get to touch 2 of the most popular live action trilogies of all time. You get to be Han Solo in video game form, and now you're in Back to the Future too. That's a hell of a claim.
Yeah, we should mention too, for people that don't make the connection, I was the voice of the Biff Tannen Museum in Back to the Future too. That was the voice, and that was a nice one. And as I said, fell out of the sky. I don't think I read for it. I don't know how the hell they picked me.
Did you
Obviously, they have excellent taste.
Did you get to meet any of the cast, having done the lines of how Biff made his millions? Did you get to actually see any of them in person?
No. Most of that stuff happens in a period of time that's referred to as post-production.
Right.
And that's when they fiddle around with the soundtrack and the picture, and but by this time the actors have all dispersed, the sets have been dismantled, and it's post-production. And that's usually when we show up, because they say, well, because they'll throw a scratch track on something which is recorded by a production assistant, and then they'll say, well, we got to get a VO person in here to do this, and that's when we arrive. Other than animation, voiceover is usually just about the last thing that happens on any project. Like a TV commercial, that's all locked down, picture, music, everything, graphics. The last thing they do is slap the voiceover on it, and boom, it goes on the air. The only area in voiceover where we get in the beginning is animation. The first thing that happens, of course, is somebody has to write a script, or somebody has to come up with an idea for a show, and then somebody has to write a script.
Right.
But at that point, in come the actors. There are some drawings of characters, but there's not a frame of animation been created. And we do the voice tracks, and then the animators animate to those voice tracks. And so the one area of the business where we get in early is animation. The rest of the time, we're just about the last thing that happens.
Are they showing you guys any kind of like storyboard images or anything, so you could track like what's happening, like Shipwreck is fighting with this guy, or
No, that's the director's job. These storyboards are in these giant loose leaf binders, and there's no way the actors could work with them. I mean, I actually did a show once where they tried to give us all storyboards, and people were fumbling with pages. There was noise. The books were falling off the music stands. We gave up about halfway through. It just didn't work. So a big part of the director's job is to say, all right, Shipwreck comes in the room. He sees the girl. Somebody reaches for a gun. Shipwreck does this. And he paints a whole picture of what's going on. That's assuming the director has done his or her homework. There was one guy I worked for. I swear he never looked at anything. I don't think he did any homework. He would show up, and we would be doing it, and maybe your character screams.
Yeah.
Well, why am I screaming, and how big does it need to be? Did I stub my toe, or did I fall off a cliff? So you're going, excuse me, what's happening here? And he had a stock line he would come up with. He'd say, well, why don't we all tune in November and find out? he didn't, I don't think he knew, and he was angry at you for asking the question because you were showing how little preparation he had done. I am not talking about Wally Burr. Wally was one of the most prepared directors I ever worked for. He would frequently arrive bleary-eyed because he'd been up till 4 a.m. poring over these storyboards and scripts and making notes. So
what is that the turnaround like with that when it comes to something like a serial series where it's every day is a new episode in its heyday? What is that turnaround time from script to television screen back then?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. You would have to talk to a producer. We were brought in, we recorded the episode, and at some point something got on the air. But how long that took, that's way above my pay grade.
This seems like the workload on something, when you get to that, 75, 100 episodes. I mean, that's a ton of animation to accomplish and to make sure that your guys' voice tracks are all good, and then to turn around and animate that to the voice tracks, which that's one of the, in live action, that is one of the things that is the most crucial, is making sure the, either lapel or, the boom handler has got the microphone right, because that's one of the hardest things. If the voice track doesn't match with your video feed, it's near to impossible to try to fix that. So to animate to make sure that all the characters' mouths are moving, in a resemblance that is, correct, is hard enough. But then to do it to the voice tracks in a timetable that you guys are putting out as many episodes as you did, like that's something that I don't know if we necessarily have in this generation anymore, where there's definitely cartoons still, but the quantity along with the quality, I don't know, will ever be matched to the time of the Transformers and the G.I. Joes and all those kind of shows that we got to grow up with, man.
Yeah, and they were doing it by hand.
Yeah.
Now a lot of it is computer generated. That's just an area of the business about which I know next to nothing. It's the truth of the matter is I was born in the wrong time period. The perfect job for me would have been radio actor.
Oh man.
And I did hear a lot of the golden age of radio as I was growing up, or not a lot of it, but the tail end of it. But actually the last radio drama, which was I think Johnny, was it Johnny? Yeah, I think it was Johnny Dollar. They did the last episode in 1962, and that was the year I graduated from high school, so there's no way I could be a part of that. But the closest I could get to it was doing animation, and to me, it's a radio show. If somebody wants to draw a picture, that's their business. I'm doing a radio show here, because really all I'm thinking about is that voice and how does it sound, and are the line readings good. I'm giving no thought to the picture. I don't even know what's happening on my face. If I were to be if I were suddenly try to be an on-camera actor, it'd be a whole different thing, because I might sound right, but look idiotic. I don't know. I don't know.
The mention of that, of thinking of it as like a radio show, that's pretty cool. I don't know if you listen to a lot of audiobooks or not, but if I'm not in a position, like if I'm driving or whatever, to sit with the actual book in front of me, like I love listening to audiobooks or podcasts. Obviously we have one that do like dramatization, whether it be like real crime all the way to like space fantasy type stuff, just because of that you being able to visualize it yourself as you're listening to these characters is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
And
I gotta say my hat's off to the people that do audiobooks. I've only done one book, and that's mine. and I almost went nuts. That's a lot of work. I almost quit twice and fired myself 3 times. I got through it, but I don't know that I would do another book.
And your book that you just mentioned, Voice, Recall a Life in Radio and Voiceovers.
Tut tut, it's vocal recall.
Vocal Recall. I apologize. Vocal Recall, a Life in Radio and Voiceovers.
Yes.
This memoir of your journey in the entertainment industry is quite an overtaking. You jokingly said off the air, we were talking about the amount of detail and the length in which is packed into this thing that people can check out and really learn about your journey in this. What was this? What was it for you that really made you decide, like, hey man, like I want to put this book together to make sure that I get my story assembled correctly at this time that you've started it?
Well, it was sort of like my career and evolution. It originally began with me trying to write a monologue and realizing at a certain point, this is either the world's longest monologue or it's a book. And I didn't think I was capable of writing a book. I didn't even dare admit to myself that I was writing a book. So I played a little mind game with myself. I would just say, I'm just writing this chapter. And if nothing else happens, so be it. So I would finish that chapter, and then it would occur to me, well, here's another chapter I could write. And I would think about it and think about it. I was very lazy. It took me about a year to do this. Most writers are disciplined and they're in their writing space from 9 to noon every day or whenever it is.
Right.
But I would just putter around and go on with my life. But in the back of my mind, I was running phrases and ideas and continuity. And eventually, when my head was just about to explode, I would dive for the keyboard and type it all up as fast as I could before it evaporated. And that, eventually it got to the point where I said, well, you're about 15 chapters in, dude. This is either a book or, the world's longest pamphlet. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I never really had a master plan, but I ended up with a book in the end.
And the length of which, reading it that you break down so many of the stories, from your career, is all of that your recognition, or did you hit up some of the people that you used to work with and say, hey, I'm writing a book right now and I'm trying to remember, at this time, do you remember this certain stuff? Like, did you have people that were helping you kind of compile notes for you to translate into the book, or were you doing most of it on your own?
It was all memory. And some people have said, boy, you've got a fantastic memory. How do you remember all that stuff? And I think most people, if you sort of examine your own life, just focus on a period in the past. I don't care when it is, but just really sit and think about it. And suddenly little details will start to pop up and oh gosh, yes. And then that happened. Oh, I almost forgot about that. Oh yeah. The only thing I did that was close to what you're talking about is certain people, I wanted to make sure it was as close to being correct as possible. So I would send them the chapter in question and I would say, please read this. And if I've put something in here that's utter BS, let me know and I'll take it out or I'll modify it. But in every case, it came back with, well, geez, I don't remember half of that stuff, but the stuff I do remember seems accurate. So I guess it's okay, That's as close as I came. And maybe I do have a good memory. I don't know, either that or I just obsess about the past, which isn't necessarily healthy, but.
Well, I mean, you've had a fun ride. I got to imagine, like the amount of work that you've gotten to produce and the amount of characters that you've gotten to voice alongside the talent that you've gotten to work with is that's something to be proud of, man. So the fact that people now can get a copy of your book, or what? Talk about where is this thing available at for them to check out?
Well, I have a website that is devoted to the book, and it will also provide you with links to purchase it. And that would be www.neilbook.com, neilbook.com. The title of the book is actually, is this a video podcast? Or
Yeah.
I know we're looking at each other, but maybe some of these I've done, I see the guy, but it turns out it's audio only. Anyway, here is.
Oh yeah, check that out.
The book in question, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers by Neil Ross. It's available at Amazon in both print and Kindle form. Look at how big this thing is. If you hate the book, at least it's a great doorstop.
Yeah.
And it's, as I said, Kindle and print. And then there is an audio version, there's a link for that at www.neilbook.com. But I know a lot of people are Audible subscribers. I'm happy to report the book is also available on Audible.
Oh, wow. Right on.
So if that's how you roll, you can find it at Audible. Vocal Recall by Neil Ross.
If you do the audio book, you had said that you narrated it yourself. Are we going to get some Neil Ross voices in with the audio book?
I do the voice, a little bit of the voices when it seems appropriate. Mm-hmm. If I'm talking about shipwreck, I might do a few lines in the shipwreck voice, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it is not festooned with character stuff. It's mostly me.
So you went in either way. If you want to read it. If you want to listen to it on the go or something, it's available for you on Audible as well. I'll leave you with this one last question. Is there a character, Neil, that you haven't voiced yet that is kind of, I'm sorry?
I say I hope so.
Well, is there one that you haven't gotten to voice yet that is kind of like, man, I hope like sometime soon if something comes along that I get to play fill in the blank?
Yeah, it sort of sounds like maybe you think I have 15 voices and I just plug them in to depending on what the character is. That isn't how it works. The best description of what we do was coined by Michael Bell, who's another voice actor, a very storied and famous voice actor. And he describes what we do as vocal Mr. Potato Head. I don't know if you remember the Mr. Potato Head game from your childhood.
Oh, yeah.
But they used to ask you to steal a potato from your mother, but now they give you a little plastic oval. And the game comes with all sorts of mustaches and glasses and noses and beards and ears. And basically, you can build all kinds of different faces by using accessories. Part of what we're doing with our voices, I maybe breeze into an audition and it's an old man. Okay.
And what kind of an old man? Is he up here somewhere? Or is he way down here somewhere in this neck of the woods, maybe? And how do I make him a little different? Well, I give him an underbite and he can talk like this. Or maybe he can be talking out of the side of his mouth and we'll see what happens with that. And
you start messing around and sometimes you come up with stuff that even surprises you. So when you say, I don't know what characters are out there. It depends on what I see visually, and the description that they write of the character. And then,
sorry to cut you off, but I guess like what I was mainly asking is not so much in the fine details like what you just demonstrated with the old man, but more in the sense of, is there like another, Shipwreck or a Transformers cartoon or something like that, that we could say this property per se is going to go be just as iconic as like Transformers? Is you, like Neil, the fan of cartoons and pop culture and stuff, would there be like a brand, whether it be like a reboot of Transformers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or anything like that, that if you got wind that they were going to start doing that series, that you would be like, man, I hope that I get to work on that show?
Nothing specific, I'm perfectly happy with what I've done up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, as long as I'm in the game, I just look forward to somebody creating a really interesting, new, innovative show with a character that fits me like a glove. And I hope I get to do that. But I don't have any specific thoughts of, I want to do an outer space thing, or I want to do a cowboy thing. I'll know it when I see it, I guess.
Well, right on, man. Again, Neil's book, Voice Recall.
Oh, he's done it again.
Oh, God.
Here's a
vocal recall. I don't know why I keep saying voice recall. Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers, is available for you guys to check out. Again, just for good measure, Vocal Recall.
I think Total Recall. That's where I got the idea. That was actually a placeholder for when I thought up the real title, and somehow I never did think up the real titles.
Vocal Recall, man. You get to recall Neil's great career. Thank you, man, for taking the time to be on the show. It was fun listening to you recall some of the past great shows that you've worked on and have entertained, I know, many upon many of our listeners on our show. So I thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Jimmy. I've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Cool, Neil.